Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Songwriting Songwriting Simplified with me, Jonny Lipsham, here at jonnylipshamstudios.co.uk. That was Studio One, repeating itself most annoyingly. So I apologize about that. I also appear to have messed up the chat here. Hang on one second. Oh, I know what I did. Okay. Let me see. I know what happened to the chat. I broke it. I broke the chat. All right, so sorry about that. So yes, welcome to another episode of the incredibly slick, incredibly well-rehearsed Songwriting Simplified with me, Jonny Lipsham, here at jonnylipshamstudios.co.uk, here in the southeast of Scotland. I hope everybody is doing well and has had a great first half of their week. It's been a good one for me too. Recovering from what actually turned out to be a busier than expected weekend, but we're all good. I'm fine. I am now well recovered. So I hope everyone is doing well. I'm going to have to look over here for the chat because I appear to have broken it over here, unless I can just hit this button here, which might work. Let's see. Will that work? Yes, it looks like it did work. Hang on. Okay, that looks like that. I might have just fixed the problem with the chat because basically I have the chat on two screens. I have it on this screen, and then when I go to use Studio One, I also have a second instance of the chat over here on this screen, so that when I'm in Studio One, I can see what you guys are saying in the chat, basically. That is how it works. A little bit of inside information on how I run this stream. And basically, I forgot to make sure that the chat was in both places, which it now is. So that is good. All right, so Billy, of course, was first in the door. So well done to Billy. Pretty much like 10 minutes after I advertised the show, he kind of went, oh, I have a notification, therefore I'm in there. So well done to him. Followed about 20 minutes or so later by Ron over in California. I think it's California that Ron is in. He's asking where everybody is at. And I think most people are spread around the world, but we have a good number of people in the United States. So that's cool. So if you would like to put in the chat where you are watching from, please do that. That would be quite cool. Just basically to see where everybody is. That would be nice. You don't have to give your exact address details or anything like that. Just, you know, what part of the United States or what part of your country you are in would be cool, you know? So, you know, if you're from California, say, hey, I'm in California. Or if you are in Montana, say, hey, I'm in Montana. Or if you're in Australia, say, I'm in Australia, I'm in Victoria, or, you know, Western Australia, or wherever it is you are. Those are just examples. But yeah, that would be pretty cool. And I knew Lloyd was going to say something funny there. He says watching from prison. That's hilarious. Because I'm pretty sure that's not true. But all the same. And so we got Tony Stringer here as well. We got Dave from Aurora's Boring Alice, who is doing some things. And we got Kyle Traduziak, we got Brett Marley, we got Bobby Booth, we got Don Oliver, and as I mentioned, we got Lloyd at Papa Raptor Music here as well. And we got Keith from Radio Top Trumpet, and that is it so far. So, hopefully we'll get some more people in here. These shows tend to not be quite as well attended as the Sunday Night Live show is. And that's okay. I don't mind. I don't mind that we have a smaller audience for this. But just as long as it is helping you guys out and it is serving you by helping answer your songwriting, arranging, composing, and music theory questions that you might have, that's what this show is all about. And helping, you know, throughout the year, we have, for those of you that don't know, for those of you that are watching and are not subscribed, or maybe you're brand new and you're not subscribed yet. If you want to take part in the chat and you want to say hello, please hit the subscribe button, give it a couple of minutes, and then the chat will be opened up to you and you will be able to say where you are, and you'll be able to also ask any questions. Daryl Harrison is here as well, just walked in the door. So, what was I saying there? So, yes, that's what this channel is all about. It's all about your songwriting, your composing, your arranging, and your music theory questions. We can talk about lyrics. We can talk about different ways to write lyrics, whether you rhyme, whether you don't rhyme, internal rhyming. We can talk about all those kinds of things, as well as talk about, melody, harmony, backing vocals, horn arranging, string arranging, whatever you guys need to help you develop better and better songs. I'm here for that. One of the things I think most people struggle with is the arrangement for their song. That can be a big challenge, because what a lot of people do, and what I hear a lot of people doing, is they basically just throw a lot of tracks down at their song. And they don't really have a strategy as to how the song should sound and what it should sound like when it's finished, what it should sound like when it's complete. So they don't have an idea of what instrumentation they're going to have, where things are going to be played, where things are not going to be played, that kind of thing. Melody, counter melody, what are those things? How do we do counter melody? And so this is what this channel, what this show in particular on this channel is all about, is helping you learn how to do those things and how to apply those things to your songwriting so that your songwriting becomes better and becomes more sophisticated without it actually being more sophisticated. Because that is the secret of writing a really good song, is writing a song that is both simple and sophisticated at the same time. And that's where the skill of songwriting is in creating something that is both simple, that, has a simple melody that anybody can get into their brains, can get into their person, into their body, and they can start singing along with very quickly, but also is sophisticated in as much as it makes the song interesting. And it keeps the listener engaged. So you've got to have a really, really good melody, especially for your chorus, that is simple but isn't banal. And there is that fine line between something that is simple and something that is a bit boring, a bit banal, a bit so simple it's not interesting. And this is where the challenge of writing a really great song is balancing those things. Balancing writing a really good melody that is simple enough that anybody can sing it, but is also sophisticated enough that it's interesting and grabs your attention and makes you think about the melody, but also isn't so simple that it's child's play and is therefore, you lose interest very quickly. If you write something that's too simple, the listener's not going to engage with it and is going to walk away from the song quite quickly, and that's something you don't want. So these are the things that we are going to develop some strategies for over the course of this year, and we have songwriting challenges. We have one for Halloween, we have one for Christmas. We've had those for a couple of years now, but we are also thinking of adding a couple of more songwriting challenges in. Not all of our songwriting challenges are going to have prizes. Some of them do, some of them don't. But I would really encourage you to take part in the challenges, even if there is no prize, because by taking part, by actually committing yourself to writing something and put into practice the things that we talk about and the strategies that we develop over the course of this year, you are going to finish the year with songs that you have written, that you have recorded, and you have put out for other people to listen to, whether that's in a private workspace for our contests, or whether you've actually uploaded them publicly to somewhere like SoundCloud or Bandcamp or somewhere like that, or Reverb Nation, or one of those places where people can actually publicly, the broad public in the world can listen to your music. So I know that there are some people here that don't actually write music. They are mixing engineers. Now, the unique thing that you have for you as a mixing engineer, and this is one of the ways in which Songwriting Simplified can really help you as a mixing engineer, because your job as a mixing engineer is to bring out these elements that I'm talking about. So, bringing forward some counter melody, but making sure it doesn't get on top of the vocal. How do we do that? So, as a mixing engineer, don't kind of shut off the world of songwriting and think, well, I don't write music, so this is not relevant to me. It's still relevant if you're a mixing engineer, because if you're a mixing engineer, you need to be able to identify these key music concepts so that you can make those concepts stand out and come forward when they need to, and also be in the background when they need to be as well, so that you can balance these things against each other and make sure that the listener is able to identify those things and direct their attention to those things when they need to be directed to them throughout the course of the song. So you need to understand at least something about melody, at least something about the arrangement of the song, at least something about how to come up with a counter melody so that you can identify what a counter melody is. Also, like the emotional content of the song. And how that emotional content is achieved. If you can understand at least some of how those things work, how those emotional concepts are achieved, then you will be a better mixing engineer as a result, because you can then apply mixing techniques to bring those elements out in the song when they are required to make the song better. So that's your job. So all of this stuff is important as well. So even if you never actually partake in any of the contests because you're not a songwriter, you can help the songwriters by mixing their songs and helping their songs get the best possible sound, even if it is just for the contest and it's in the private workspace for the contest, or even maybe if it is in public release. It's kind of up to you how you want to work that with the songwriters that you choose to work with, or maybe the songwriters may actually talk to you. So mixing engineers, we have Kyle Drajusiak and we have Bobby Booth, and I'm sure that there are others here who would put their hand up and say, yes, I'm more of a mixing person and a producer and less of an arranger and a songwriter and a composer. And that's okay. I want all sides of this to be here so that you can all learn from each other and you can all work collaboratively together to make these songs, to make your songs really, really cook, because that's the idea. So that when we get to these songwriting contests, the whole point of the contest isn't actually about winning the prizes. The prizes are a byproduct. They're kind of like a little bit of an incentive. But the point of the contest is to put into practice the things that we talk about. And the things that the answers that I provide to questions that you give. And things that I demonstrate at the piano. And concepts that we talk about, so that you can put those things into practice, and then whether you are the songwriter or you are the producer mixer, you can kind of work collaboratively together to make a really, really great song that is going to be a challenge for both me and Rich and whomever I am partnering with in the contest or the challenge, whichever it's going to be. So for challenges, it's mostly going to be me on my own. For contests, I will either be partnering with Rich Cresswell or somebody else. Might be Louis Dutouri, who is from Alps Media, who is this Alps Media basically sponsors Songwriting Simplified and Sunday Night Live. And so I may be partnering with him, I may be partnering with Rich, I may be partnering with some other people as well to make those contests happen. But the challenges are mine. Those will just be me, and there will be broadly no prizes for those. They are just a challenge to give you some impetus, some stimuli to make music. Because I know sometimes there are different points of the year where we're just like, I don't know what to write about. I don't know where to start sometimes. So I will present some challenges that will give you, hey, it'll give you a brief and, you know, a little bit of a challenge that will be like, let's write a piece of music, not necessarily in a particular style, because I want you guys to work within your own genres, but to make use of certain concepts. So I may well say, I want your song to have this particular rhythmic pattern inside of it, at least twice through the song, and it must be clear and obvious where it is. And also maybe this little bit of harmonic device, or this little melodic device. Maybe things like, I mean, we've not really talked about things like ornaments, because as soon as I say the word ornament, you guys are immediately going to start looking at your mantelpiece and, you know, things that are on there. That's not what I mean when I say ornaments. When I'm talking about ornaments in music, I'm talking about decorations to notes. Ornaments are really, really useful. Ron says maybe we can discuss homophonic music. We could discuss homophonic music. Maybe, Ron, you could start with what you actually know about homophonic music. And we can expand upon that and turn that into a bit of a discussion point. Ornaments are great. What is an ornament? It's a decoration to a note. So I'm going to give you an example. If I play this note here, this is a D above middle C. But if I play this C sharp slightly ahead of it, we get what we call a grace note. And there are lots of different types of grace note. This one, because the note is kind of crushed one into the next, we call this, it's an Italian word, it's an acciaccatura, which basically means one note is kind of crushed into the other. There is another type of grace note, and this one is called the appoggiatura. I know, another big Italian word. And what this means is the note before it, before the main note, the target note, basically borrows some of the rhythm, the rhythmic value from the main note. And so you would see something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Da-da. So we're getting da-da. So we're borrowing a 16th note from the actual target note, and we're using that on a note either above or below. So in this case, we're doing from below, but we could also do from above. And you hear that quite a lot in particularly Scottish country music, Scottish traditional folk music, and we call it a Scotch snap because the note snaps. You can have a chromatic one, which is what I've just been doing, or a diatonic one, which is from the scale that the song is in. So if we're in G major, so it borrows, whereas the other one, the acciaccatura, doesn't. And you hear those a lot in blues music. So something like those are not borrowing any rhythmic value from the target notes. They are crunched into those other notes. Lots and lots of decorations there. Lots of ornaments. So blues music in particular is replete with lots of ornaments to decorate those notes. And you get this particularly on the piano because, unlike a human voice or a guitar, you can't bend the notes on a piano. Well, you can, but you need a hammer and a chisel to do it. And so you need another person to basically put the chisel against the string and then push the string. And you got to be careful that the string then doesn't snap back into your face. So that is one way in which you can bend a string on a piano. But generally speaking, it's not possible to do that. So this is where that kind of thing comes into play. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing like a little triplet run into my target note here, using the 4, the flat 5, and the 5, going into the flat 7. And then reversing it. And then some little grace notes going into this root note here in the key of G. So those are some examples of contemporary ornaments. In years past, like in the Baroque period in particular, you would have things like mordents and turns. What's a mordent? A mordent is where you play the note, then you play the note above, and then you play the note itself again. So like that. Why did those exist? Well, because back then you had the harpsichord. You didn't have the piano. The harpsichord did not have a whole lot of sustain to it. It was quite a soft, quiet instrument. Because basically, unlike the piano, which has these big fat hammers that strike the string, the harpsichord has a mechanism that plucks the string. A little bit like a plectrum on a guitar, but the strings are really thin. And so there's not a lot of volume to them, and there's not a lot of sustain. So because of that, you have to do things like that. Or you do a trill. So when you do a trill in classical music, if you're talking pre-classical period trills, you play a turn at the end. What's a turn? Turn's where you play the note itself, the note below, or the note above, the note itself, the note below, the note itself again. So you go note, note above, note, note below, note. Okay, so if you're doing a trill, you put a turn on at the end. I'm really, really terrible at trills because I'm not a classically trained piano player. I'm not even a trained piano player. I'm a strategically shaved Scottish monkey that plays jazz. That's me. So I'm not a classically trained piano, but a piano player, I should say. I'm not even a classically trained piano because I'm a person. But so that's at least two little ornaments of the classical period, mordents and turns. There's a whole bunch of them. There's an inverted mordent, which is where you play the note and then the note below and then the note itself. And then you've got inverted turns where the turn is upside down. So there's lots of different variations of all of those kind of things, but they are really, really useful. You don't really come across them very much in popular or contemporary music. You might come across a trill, for example, at the start of the theme tune to damn it, what's it called? TV film. Dun 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 dun. I've forgotten what that's called. I've totally forgotten the name of that TV show. But anyway, you hear the trill in the flute, and then it does a little run upwards to finish that trill. It's not a turn, but it's a little upward run. But anyway, you hear the trill, and there are trills in the Star Trek theme as well. Mission Impossible. Thank you very much, Brett. Yes, Mission Impossible. Lloyd also said that as well. Weren't trills in the Star Trek episode The Trouble with Trills? No, that was The Trouble with Tribbles. So let's go back to Ron's little question about, or discussion point, I should say, about homophonic music. And he says, a singing minstrel would be homophonic. Bach would be counterpoint. That is correct. Homophonic basically means one melody. Counterpoint is many melodies at the same time. One melody, and then there are other counter melodies that make up counterpoint. And all of these melodies are played at the same time. Now, Bach was the master of counterpoint, but he wasn't the first one to really do counterpoint. You can go back into the medieval period. Before then, people like William Byrd, the English composer, Palestrina, the Italian composer, they really had counterpoint down to a fine art. So, but you might be thinking, well, I don't know anything about classical music at all. So, and certainly I've never heard of William Byrd, and I've never heard of Palestrina. You may have heard of Pachelbel, and you're probably like, I might have. Pachelbel's canon? Yes, Pachelbel's canon. Pachelbel wrote his canon during the very early part of the Baroque period. He was an Italian, I think he was Italian, Baroque period composer. And the canon is a form of contrapuntal, or music that has counterpoint in it, contrapuntal music. And so what this has is it starts with a theme that is actually a bass line that goes all the way through the whole piece. And then you add another melody, and then you have another melody on top of that, you have another melody on top of that, and then finally you have another melody on top of that. And all of those melodies end up playing all together at the same time. And it's an ingenious piece of music. It's been used in a whole slew of television and radio commercials, because it's public domain. It's, the guy's been dead for probably, at this point, 900 years. And people are spamming my little chat group, which I'm going to have to go and mute because it's getting annoying. It won't let me mute. There we go. Mute notifications. There we go. Okay, guys, stop pinging the chat, for goodness sake. I'm trying to do a damn live stream. Anyway, so that is Pachelbel. That is canon. Canon basically is layering up melodies on top of each other. So there is a popular music form that does indeed use counterpoint and use canonic style musical devices, and that would be Dixieland jazz. If you've ever heard of any traditional or Dixieland jazz before, you'll hear that you'll have a main melody played by a trumpet, and then you'll have secondary melodies played by clarinet and trombone. That's kind of like the main frontline instrumentation in a Dixieland jazz group. You have a rhythm section, plus you have trumpet, and clarinet and trombone. Why those three instruments? And maybe you might even have a tenor saxophone. Certainly in the late 1920s, early 1930s, when the tenor saxophone, or the saxophone in general, was kind of becoming popular, at first the saxophone was a bit of a comedy instrument during the kind of early music hall vaudeville period. Not long after Adolph Sax had invented it in about 1912, 1913, then the saxophone started to become popular by the early 1920s. But really, it didn't have much of a range, mostly because most saxophone players didn't realize that there was a whole another range, so they tended to play quite low down in the register of the instrument. But the whole point of having a trumpet, a clarinet, a woodwind instrument, and a trombone as well is that you'd have different registers, different tones that would, kind of blend well together, but also contrast with each other. So whilst the trumpet and the clarinet would kind of share broadly the same kind of range and register, because they have a different volume and a different amount of projection, the trumpet is generally going to have the melody. For like the A section of your song, and then the B section, the clarinet would take the melody, and the trumpet would play a little bit softer and a little bit lower down in its register, and provide maybe a counter melody or a harmony part along with the trombone. And so you get this kind of interweaving, accompanying melodies by the clarinet and the trombone, with the lead melody being played by the trumpet. So Dixieland jazz is basically the modern 20th century equivalent of 15th century counterpoint, 15th century canons. So you do get equivalences. I mean, this is one of the interesting things about the development of popular music against the development of classical music, is they actually mirror each other quite well. So you could call, Dixieland jazz and vaudeville and music hall music, the music the classical music equivalent of kind of like the medieval and Baroque periods. And then you get into the swing and big band era, and that's kind of the classical period, where you have Mozart and Beethoven and the expansion of the orchestra, the expansion of a small band into a big band in the 1920s, 1930s. And then you get the bebop revolution, where the big band is kind of rejected a little bit, and you get small groups playing faster, more sophisticated harmonic and more sophisticated melodic music, less counterpoint, a lot less counterpoint. And that's when you get into, but big bands are still kind of going on. In fact, big bands are getting bigger in the 1940s, and they're becoming incredibly harmonically advanced. People like Stan Kenton writing incredibly advanced pieces. And you have Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, and people like that in the 19th century writing great orchestral and choral works. And so, the sound gets massive in the Romantic period. The sound gets massive in terms of large ensemble music in the 1940s and 1950s, but you've also got these small groups playing less sophisticated music. Just as interesting, but less sophisticated. And that's where you get Miles Davis and the cool and all of that. But you also get the development of rock and roll in the 1950s as well. And so, there is a small kind of chamber group reaction to the big over-the-top Romantic period works as well. So they kind of do mirror each other quite well. So yeah, homophonic music is kind of music where you have a single line, maybe just a solo voice and a harpsichord accompaniment, madrigal style, which is what Ron is alluding to. And then counterpoint is where you have a lot more different melodies going on at the same time. Yes, Carol Kay came up with the riff for Mission Impossible, but it was Lalo Schifrin, I think, that wrote the actual tune. I think I could be wrong about that. And Lalo Schifrin was fundamentally, he was a big band arranger who turned to writing orchestral music for film and television. But he was a jazz musician. I think he was a trumpet player. Primarily, but a great arranger as well, and wrote a whole bunch of big band music, which is fantastic, but also wrote some really great film scores, both very kind of classical film scores, but also kind of jazz-inflected film scores as well, for, incidental music for films, as well as titles like Mission Impossible, stuff like that. I mean, the melody for Mission Impossible is just frankly weird. Why? Because Lalo Schifrin was highly influenced by Dizzy Gillespie and the beboppers. And so he was into those kind of melodic ideas of wide intervallic leaps. So, kind of like those kind of intervals. Which, of course, nobody else was really doing other than, the bebop guys were doing that kind of thing. So, yes, Mission Impossible is a great example of a melody that is both memorable. You've got that bass line that is incredibly memorable. Everybody knows it. Then you've got the melody that is a bit weird, but guess what? It's just as memorable. Most people try and sing it, but they don't get the pitches exactly right because the intervals are a little bit weird. But everybody knows how it goes. And then it's got the bongos and the claves and things because he was into kind of, Brazilian and Latin percussion and stuff as well. And the drumming is fantastic. The drum set playing is fantastic. I think on the original Mission Impossible score, I'm trying to think, it might have even been Roy Haynes, the bebop jazz drummer that had played with Charlie Parker, who played on that original recording of the Mission Impossible theme tune. But that whole show is fantastic for that kind of jazz-inflected music that's very, very memorable but sophisticated as well. All right, we got any other questions or any other talking points that you want to raise? Because that was a good one from Ron. Brett says, so homophonic music in contemporary times would be a singer-songwriter like a John Denver type of performer. Perhaps. Yes, perhaps a John Denver type, maybe kind of folk influenced thing. People like Paul Simon, John Denver, and people like that who are guitar players, acoustic guitar players, singer-songwriters, is that they were very influenced by both American and English folk music. And they brought, folk melodies from those two countries into their songwriting, and made them really, really popular songs as well. So yeah, perhaps John Denver, Paul Simon, and people like that would be a good comparator to I can't even say the word now. Homophonic music. Because, you have just the vocal and the guitar. Those are the most important parts of the song for people like John Denver and people like that. It's the vocal, it's the acoustic guitar, and then everything else kind of sits behind it. So this is another point where a mixing engineer would need to be able to identify what is the star, the star sound. What's the most important elements of this song? Different musical styles are going to have different important elements. So being able to identify those is going to be really important because those are the things that you're probably going to want to, in my opinion, as a mixing engineer, pay attention to those things last of all. The things that are going to be up front and going to sit on top of your mix. Those are the elements that you probably want to deal with and treat last, and everything else you kind of deal with first. You get the broad background of the mix first, and then, the vocal. And then, of course, anything that's accompanying the vocal, like the acoustic guitar, that's really key and important. So you might have an acoustic guitar, but you also maybe have a soprano saxophone obbligato, for example. And we've talked about obbligatos before. An obbligato being like a counter melody to the song vocal melody. It's not the same. It doesn't have the same importance as the vocal, but it's kind of like a good second place. So you want it to kind of be up front, but not so up front that it overwhelms the vocal. So, so John Denver is a good example. John Denver's music actually has been represented in films in very interesting ways as well. If you are familiar with the Final Destination series of films, they actually use John Denver's music in a very amusing way, actually. You know when somebody is about to die because a John Denver song plays. So it's kind of like, that is the kind of the portent of death, is when you see, like, maybe reflected in glass, the person that's about to die next, how they are going to die, and you hear a John Denver song accompanying that, and then you see it actually happen. Maybe, a few seconds or a minute or so later. It's a very, very interesting use of music in film. I think Quentin Tarantino and maybe Oliver Stone have done that kind of thing before. I think particularly Tarantino is quite fond of juxtaposing, real graphic, gore-laden violence with some kind of sweet folk song or something like that. You know how some people like for a very gruesome fight scene where there's lots of blood and guts and gore would have, big stirring, aggressive orchestral music to depict, to help reinforce the aggression and the anger in this thing. Tarantino does the opposite. He juxtaposes. He has music that is kind of light-hearted and funny and entertaining to offset the violence. It's really interesting that he does that, and I think that's his personal sense of humor as well. Just Bob says, when does tempo speed impede on what sounds musical? When does music lose its rhythm or its toe-tapping sound? Well, that's something that is going to be genre-dependent, because not every piece of music is supposed to be toe-tapping. For example, if you listen to a song like Cherokee, for example, Cherokee was never meant to be played at breakneck speed, but the beboppers and later jazz musicians in the 1950s and 1960s basically decided that they were going to see how fast they could play it. And still to this day, I mean, when I was at university and playing in jazz groups at university, it was a speed contest to see how fast we could play Cherokee. So when I was playing drums in the rhythm section, it was my job to kind of set the tempo. And if we had, a trumpet player or a saxophone player that we didn't think was going to be able to keep up with us, we would just set the tempo to like 350, 400 beats a minute. And off we'd go, and we'd play that tune. So even if the tempo is breakneck fast like that, it can still be musical. Extreme speed, whether fast or slow, doesn't necessarily mean that the music is not going to be musical. It's how you play the music that will determine whether the performance is musical or not. I mean, at some breakneck speeds, if you're not used to playing that fast, your fingers on your instrument, whether it's a piano, a saxophone, or a trumpet, or your hand on the slide of a trombone, may not be fast enough to keep up with the tempo, and in which case, yes, it will start to break down. And so sometimes when we're at university, that was the challenge. Setting a tempo that might be too fast for somebody to play. And so, at that point, yes, for me personally, when I was a student, I didn't really care. It was fun to see to see some of these other musicians not being able to keep up with us. But as I got older and as I got wiser as a performing professional musician, I realized that was not really the point. The point was to make it musical for everybody, including the soloists. The idea of playing Cherokee at 400 beats a minute shouldn't be about who can keep up. It should be about, does this make music that is fun for everybody? And so if I knew that there was a trumpet player that could play at 400 beats a minute, we'd have a blast at 400 beats a minute. But if not, then there was no point in playing Cherokee that fast. We would slow it down to maybe 280, 300 beats a minute, which is still pretty fast. But, playing up-tempo jazz, that's not really that fast. But there again, it depends upon your style. If you're not playing jazz, if you're playing country, for example, if you're playing like, a Nashville Train style song, those can be pretty fast. Those can be as fast as Cherokee at 400 beats a minute. I've heard it done. I've heard bluegrass music played that fast, and it's still incredibly musical. So tempo, I don't think necessarily means that the music is going to break down necessarily if it's too fast or if it's very, very fast. And likewise, I think even at a slow tempo, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to become boring. It's the content that is key, regardless of the tempo. But that's a great, great question. Really, really great question. Lloyd says, so would something like standard 12-bar blues be considered homophonic? It depends upon how you play it and how many people you've got involved in playing it. So if you've got like a little rhythm section, piano, bass, drums, guitar, and maybe, a vocalist, and then maybe a tenor saxophone, a trumpet, a trombone, or something like that, kind of like as backup horn section, or, they are going to be soloists at some point. It depends upon how you're going to go about that. What are the other musicians going to be doing? Let's say you've got like a standard Chicago blues band, and you've got your vocalist singing. What are the other musicians doing? Are they playing in between the vocal phrases? In which case, it's kind of verging on counterpoint. Or are they playing kind of a little bit behind the vocalist, playing a counter melody to the vocalist? Then you're getting into a little bit more counterpoint and less homophonic. If you just had rhythm section and just vocal on their own, then you're much more in kind of like a homophonic kind of context where you've just got literally just one person doing the melody. And so you can do both. You can actually, in your songwriting, you can have both a homophonic texture and something much more contrapuntal. And in fact, you might find that those are, I keep hitting the pop shield of this mic, sorry about that. You might find that that's a good little offset or a good little contrast. So maybe your verse, you want to be nice and spare and sparse and thin in texture with not much going on. So maybe you just have the vocal and a guitar and maybe a little bit of very, very light percussion or very light drums with a very, very simple bass part. And then when you get to your pre-chorus, you're starting to thicken up the texture. You're starting to add more instrumentation in. And then when you get to your chorus, everything is much bigger. Maybe you introduce more guitars. Maybe you introduce backing vocals. Maybe you introduce a horn section that will provide maybe a little counter melody to the melody for the chorus. And then when you get back to the verse, everything goes back down again. Or maybe it's a little bit less down. Maybe at this point you've got the full rhythm section in plus the vocal for your second verse, but your first verse might be quite spare. And this is good. This is a good thing to do. And this is where arranging is key. And this is where developing and expanding your arrangement out like that is going to be really important for developing your song. And making sure that your song is impactful all the way through from start to finish. And contrasting sections like a homophonic section with just a guitar and a vocal in the center, mixing engineers in the center, everything is very folded down to mono and maybe really, really bone dry. No reverb, no delay. Everything is super, super dry and intimate. And again, you can use compression to get that intimacy as well. So you've got the vocal really, really, really up front, but really, really dry and almost brittle sounding. Almost, but not quite brittle sounding. And then you build up and you widen the stereo mix a little bit for your pre-chorus. And then you go full wide for the chorus. And this is where maybe you've got those guitars on the left and the right that are waiting in the wings. And then they come in and suddenly the whole mix opens up and your reverbs and your delays, they all come in, and then you collapse it down to a little bit, maybe a little wider than mono for verse 2. And then you go back out to the chorus again, and then maybe you have like a guitar solo or something like that, and everything is still big. And then maybe you suck everything back down to mono again for like half a chorus for your final chorus, and then you open everything up really wide again. So you make the latter half of your chorus. This is kind of standard songwriting arranging, by the way. This is how pop songs are done. It's almost standard to do it like that. Big intro. Really, really narrow, thin texture, mono, dry first verse. Pre-chorus, beginning to expand that out. Wide for the chorus and big and full and loud and in your face. And then you bring everything back down. You maybe even bring the dynamic range down as well. So, or not the dynamic range, but you maybe make everything quieter for the verses and then loud for the chorus. So you're doing that and the volume as well. And you're providing contrast that way. This is all the arranging game that you can play to keep the listener interested. And then the candy at the end of this is, for the listener, is things like little bits of counter melody, a little bit of a trumpet line on the left, a little bit of a saxophone line on the right. You know, a clarinet melody that's maybe just sitting just behind the vocal, you know, providing just a little phrase here and there in between what the vocal's doing. That's what we call an obligato. Stuff like that. That's how you provide a good arrangement for your song. And that's kind of what I do. My day job is working at Presonus. My night job is writing arrangements for songs, for songwriters. So I don't do a whole lot of songwriting these days. Most of what I do is writing arrangements. So that means I'm doing that kind of thing. I'm writing charts out to make those kind of things that I've just talked about happen. And some of that requires me writing for an orchestral accompaniment or a horn section or some backing vocal harmonies or all of those to make a particular song come together. And then that's what I do. And then, you know, if it's something that's got a decent budget to it, I may end up in the studio recording with the musicians, and I may well, if there's like an orchestral thing or a string ensemble or a brass section, I may well end up conducting that. So those are the kind of things that that I do when I'm not working for Presonus. Lloyd says, I was trying to envision a brick wall that would divide between homophonic and counterpoint, such as bass thumping the root or a walking bass line, or a guitar playing a repeating riff versus just strumming a chord. Would the difference between strumming a chord, homophonic versus arpeggio, counterpoint? No, I think maybe you are not quite understanding what homophonic actually means. Homophonic, an arpeggio, by the way, is not counterpoint. It's an arpeggio. So doing this, you know, That's not actually counterpoint. In a certain context, it could be counterpoint, but broadly speaking, it's not. It's just an accompaniment. That's just an arpeggiated accompaniment. Counterpoint would be where, you know, one person plays and somebody else above that plays but playing those two things at the same time, that would be counterpoint. So the main melody is down here. And then the counterpoint is above it. So this would be a counterpoint above the melody. Okay, so that would be counterpoint with those two happening at the same time. So strumming a chord or playing an arpeggio is not really counterpoint. Counterpoint is more than one melody. It's not a different accompaniment style. So even me doing an arpeggio here and then playing, you know, bass notes below that, that's not counterpoint either. And one is actually not counterpoint to the other necessarily. I can see how you might interpret them that way, but they're not really counterpoint. Now, if I played, you know, a descending walking bass line that was a bit melodic, you know, that might be considered counterpoint. Especially if I develop the melody. I'm not really a classical piano player, so this is going to be challenging for me to play. But if I did something like... yeah. See, I'm not really a classical trained piano player, so I can't really do that. But I think you get the idea where... So it could be construed that what I just played there was a counterpoint. Now, if I had a melody above that was very straight, you know. If I had that melody going on above what I was doing with the, you know, if I had that melody going on over the top of that, that would be counterpoint. Because my arpeggios in that context would provide a counterpoint, or the melody above would provide the counterpoint to my... Okay, so that could be considered counterpoint. And you would hear that in Mozart. So if you listen to Mozart symphonies, particularly the final movement of his symphonies, you will hear that kind of thing where you have a very strong strident melody, and then you have the second violins and violas maybe playing, you know, really, really fast runs. Things like that. That's counterpoint. So strumming a chord versus arpeggio, that's just a different accompaniment style. It's not really homophonic versus arpeggio. So I hope that you kind of understand that. It's a little hard to unpack the difference between homophonic and counterpoint. But counterpoint is essentially melody on top of melody on top of melody on top of melody on top of melody, all playing together at the same time. So, for example, if you sing a round, for example, which is a very, very early form of counterpoint, predates the canon, kind of developed in the early 9th century. And here's a round that persists to this very day, over 1,000 years later. You know what it is? Row, row, row your boat. So if you have like 5 people singing row, row, row your boat, and each one starts after the next line. So somebody starts with row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, and then the next person starts row, row, row your boat when the first person starts their next line. And then you keep going until everybody has started. That's counterpoint, because you've got the same melody being sung by 5 different people with an offset from where they start. And what you end up with essentially is 5 different melodies happening at the same time. And that's a form of counterpoint. But it's a really early form of counterpoint, and you still hear it to this very day. It's amazing. It's amazing how that is still a thing and it's still popular. But there we go. All right, so with that fantastic series of questions about counterpoint and homophony and orchestration and arranging and stuff like that, I think we will call it a night there. Thank you very much, everybody, for your great questions and for watching. We kind of peaked around about 17 people. I thought we peaked at 20 at one point, but it's not showing up here in the analytics. But thank you very much. Stephen Wilson is very, very late. Yes, please, Stephen, watch the replay, because I think you in particular will find the discussion in the last sort of 10-15 minutes of the show very, very interesting. Gert is also here, and Gert gave us a smiley face, and he says he was late as well. Guys, watch the replay. I think you'll find it really, really useful. So if any of you have further questions you want to ask about homophony and counterpoint and, you know, other musical developments that came out of those concepts, then please drop me an email. Go to the web address at the bottom there, jonnylipshamstudios.co.uk. It's down here, jonnylipshamstudios.co.uk. And then hit the contact form. Basically, just hit contact us, and it will automatically scroll you down to the bottom of the page, and there you can fill out the contact form, and you can ask your question that way. And that way, you're also not limited by the 160 characters or so that you get in the YouTube chat. So if you would like me to unpack some of these concepts further, maybe you've not quite understood something, that's great. I'm always happy to help, and maybe we can open this kind of up again next week. If there are sufficient people that would like me to continue unpacking this, we can talk about it some more. This is kind of stuff that I have taught at high school and also at university at undergraduate level as well. So it's not all high school stuff. Some of it is, but you know, we can certainly go off into kind of undergraduate music degree level on this for sure. It depends upon what you want to get out of it. And we can also talk about how we can practically apply counterpoint and stuff like that as well. So if you want to talk more about that and how to integrate that into your music, whatever genre you're working in, these concepts will work. So counterpoint is going to be great for dance music as much as it's going to be great for folk music, as much as it's going to be great for bluegrass and jazz. and pop and R&B and soul. You will find all of these concepts coming up as being important as well. All right, so with that, folks, we will end the show here. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on Sunday for Sunday Night Live. 6 p.m. Central, same place, same channel. Be here or be slightly rectangular. And that show focuses primarily on Studio One. So if you are a Studio One user or you are considering becoming a Studio One user, then we can talk Studio One. And if you have questions about using Studio One and how to get the best out of it, or you've got just general mixing questions, we can talk about those then. Good night, everybody. See you then.